Okay, so now let's get into texturing. And what I'm going to show you is how to texture skin from scratch. And it may look a little weird at first, but I'll kind of explain what's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and just look at the body. So I'm going to hide the shirt and the pants, and we'll go ahead and assign a new material to this to the body here. So I'm just going to hit space bar, go down here and click and assign new material, and we'll just do a simple blend material. And I'm going to make the diffuse color, I'm going to make that white. And we'll just call this skin matte. It's important to name things. And then we can close that. And I can go ahead and decrease the resolution a little bit. I'm not going to go down to the lowest one. I'll look at like level 1. Looks pretty good. I may want to go up at some point to look at the eyebrows when I texture the eyebrows, but for now, I think at level 1 or 2 is fine. So then I'm going to go over to my layers, and I'm going to switch over to my paint layers, and I'm going to create a new paint layer. And it says this has no paintable channels. So because we did a simple blend, there's no paintable channel. So let's try and assigning just a mudbox material. So we'll go assign new material, mudbox material, and that'll give us quite a few extra options. And I'll just leave this at default for now. So now I can go in here and I should be able to add a new paint layer, and we'll just call this base color, base underscore color, maybe. And because this is going to be a portfolio piece, 4096 is okay. Depending on if this is a real-time model for a video game, or for like a short film or something, that can vary. But 4096 is okay if you're if you just want to show off something in your portfolio. Now the cool thing about Mudbox is it restricts you to powers of 2, so 256, 512, 1024, 2048, 4096. So you should always try to make your textures these sizes if possible. So we'll go with 4096. PNG is fine at this point, and my channel as diffuse is what I want. So I hit OK, and I want to select my brush here. So we'll go to Paint Tools and just select my paintbrush, and I'm going to turn off Stamp, and I'm just going to make my color white. And then I'm going to go over to Flood Paint Layer, and that will basically make my model white. Now the next part here, again, it's going to look really weird at first, but let me explain what I'm doing, because I'll probably do this in a time lapse so you can just see me kind of blocking it out really quickly. But basically your face has color zones to it, these underlining colors. And if I go to Google and we just Google color zones of the face, you'll find a few images, and this is basically the one here that I'm going to try and follow here. But basically the different parts of the face have like these different underlying color tones. So we can use like a layering method where we could go in and paint these underlying color tones in, and then we can put a skin color layer on top, and we'll get a very natural looking skin tone. So as I'm doing this, and again, this is going to be a time lapse, so it's going to go by pretty quickly. But as I'm doing this, I'm going to be referencing this image, basically. So, and I have that off to the side on my other monitor to keep an eye on as I'm painting. So, coming back into Mudbox, basically all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my paintbrush here, and we'll use sort of a soft fall off like that. And let me zoom in a little bit to the face. And we'll just start painting. So I'm just going to come up to my paintbrush, and I'm going to go to color, and say we start out with like the reds. So I'm going to make my red color there, maybe not completely saturated red, and you can actually keep your painter or your color chooser open as you're doing this, but then you can just come in and paint on your model. Now I'm getting that kind of dotted pattern look, and that's because my stamp spacing is kind of high, so I'm going to lower that quite a bit, and then we get a much smoother line. And I'm not being mirrored, and I want to be mirrored for this. I'm going to go to mirror local X. So now what I do, local X, there we go. So now what I do, we'll get oops, let's redo that last. So now what I do is going to get sort of, so I'll make my brush bigger, and what I like to do is have a big brush and a low magnitude, so I can kind of build up those colors a little bit on top of that white. So, but that's basically it. You're gonna see me change my colors, and you know, this is gonna look like a clown face at first, but I'm basically just blocking out those initial color zones in the face. Okay, so once I have those kind of initial color zones blocked out, and I'm basically just holding down smooth or shift to smooth out the colors a little bit. And my character has sort of a green tone to him. So I'm going to keep that in mind, but I'll probably make those changes in Photoshop rather than in Mudbox. So for the time being, I'm just going to kind of change that. He's going to be just have like a flesh tone, a normal human flesh tone. And then when I get into Photoshop, I can sort of change those colors. So I'm not being super accurate about this. I'm not being like, there's no science to this. I basically I just want to get a rough estimate of those color zones in the face, and then I can overlay another skin color on top of that, and it should work out. So once I have that laid out, what I can do is I can make another layer on top of this. So I'm going to go new layer, and we'll call this skin tone. And all the same settings, 4096 PNG diffuse. And I'm going to go over to this layer, and again I'm going to select my brush, and we'll choose sort of like a darker fleshy desaturated skin tone, something like that, maybe a little bit lighter. And then we can come down to our brush and just say you can either flood from camera or flood from paint layer. Let's see make sure we're painting. Yeah, we're painting the right way. So let's just try flood paint layer. There we go. So now I have this skin tone on top of our base color layer. Let me save real quick because I'm starting to get a little laggy. So then we can come into our, we can try a few different things here, and I usually go back and forth. You can try just dropping the opacity, and you'll see as you do that, some of those base skin tones actually start to show through a little bit. And you want them to be kind of subtle. You don't want them to be strong. So so something like that, where it's very, very subtle. We can also try a few different blending modes. So if you go up to normal and just click normal and then use your down arrow key, it'll kind of scroll through all these different blending modes. That's also a good idea. Overlay sometimes works. I think a lot of times multiply works pretty well too. So there's multiply. But if you do that, maybe what you want to try is putting your base color layer above your skin tone and setting it to multiply. And then you can drop the opacity. And let's put this back to normal. So then you can drop the opacity on your base color layer. So that's basically what you want. You just want a very subtle, that may even be a little too much. I think we had the best results when we just had them both to normal, and we just dropped the opacity on our skin tone. We can see that a little bit. But before I do that, before I drop that, basically what I want to do at this point is start painting some variation into our skin a little bit. So I'm still gonna use my paintbrush here. I'm gonna come over to my stamp, and I'm gonna say use stamp, so that way as we paint, we're painting the same color. So let's make that a slightly lighter color. Yeah, we're not seeing much there. Let's make it quite a bit lighter. See if we can darker. There we go. So that's let's make that 100%. So let's go with a lighter skin tone, and I want to make sure I have use stamp on. I can choose a different stamp if I want. The one I have, it actually works pretty well for the scattering effect. I could use maybe that one, but I think that one looks pretty well. And then I just have random on, and then I can come and increase my opacity a little bit, and I can start to kind of give my skin a little bit of texture. When it comes to the face, you can do this. You can kind of use this as a little bit of like shading for the face. So we can come in here and sort of just texture everything a little bit. Entire body, give it a little bit of texture. A lot of this doesn't matter too much because it's not going to be seen, but you know, I'm a big fan of saying, you know, I feel like the little details, the subtle details, all adding up make something look a lot more realistic. You know, it's the things that you don't think you notice, but you do notice, that make something super detailed and kind of cool. So just giving all this a subtle texture, and then I can come in with maybe a darker skin tone. And I can come in and darken areas, like usually around your eyes, a little bit darker. The lip area. Oops, I switched to my selection tool. The lips are usually a little bit darker. The cheeks. So I usually go through, and I'll probably time lapse through this, but I usually go through and just do this a few different times with different like values of the same color and maybe slightly different hues of the same, you know, close to the same color. And this will just let me sort of emphasize areas, and it gives me a little bit of detail. Like a nice fleshy skin tone. So again, then when I'm done with that, I can just start to drop that skin tone value a little bit to get a little bit of that underlying color zones. And then I'm starting to get something that looks you know, like skin. Now from here, like I can start focusing on the eyebrows. So we'll move up inner subdivision levels where I can start to see the eyebrows. And from here I can make a new paint layer. And we'll call this eyebrows. And then just on this paint layer, I can start to paint his eyebrows. So I don't want them to be black. Maybe maybe something like a darker color like that. And I can start just by kind of shading it in a little bit. And then I can actually maybe select black and let's go to our fall off. Make sure we have a sharp fall off. And we want a really high magnitude for this, or strength, because we want it to be, we can turn our stamp off at this point. We want it to be strong. Having a tablet is super important for something like this because your pressure matters. You know, how hard you're actually pressing on the tablet matters a lot. So I would highly recommend not just using a mouse for something like this. And I'm trying to follow the edges that I have there sculpted in, but you know, it's not going to be perfect. I think for our purposes, something like this is pretty good for a skin tone. I can, again, I'm going to tweak this a little bit when I get it into Photoshop to kind of make him have a little bit of a green skin tone. But I think for now our skin is pretty good. We can move on to texturing the clothings. So that's what I'll go over in the next video. You know what? We have a little bit more time, so we're not quite at 30 minutes yet. So let me talk real quickly about a specular map. So specular map is super important, very, very important to the realism of skin, because your skin isn't as shiny everywhere. So you know, your lips are more shiny, your nose tends to be more shiny, your cheeks, your forehead, than other parts of your body. So having a good specular map is really important to making your skin look realistic. And that's you know, a big part of why this doesn't look quite right just yet, because he's kind of shiny everywhere. So let me go over real quick how I would go about making a specular map. So I would start by making a new diffuse layer. And I know that, you know, you would think, well, why not make a new specular layer? Because you can't really see it. You can't really see what you're doing very well if as a specular layer. So I'm going to make a diffuse layer, and then I'm going to switch it to a specular layer when I'm done. So I'm just going to make a new diffuse layer, and I'll call this spec. And I'm going to go ahead with my color, and I'm going to fill it from layer with black. And this is something where we can drop our resolution of our model down a little bit. We don't need it to be super high. So basically, the areas that are black are going to have very little specularity, and the areas that I paint that are white are going to have a lot of specularity. So I'm going to grab my brush. We'll do a soft fall off. We're going to use our stamp again, and high magnitude. We'll do not quite that high. We'll do something a little bit lower and make our brush a little bit larger. So now I'm just going to paint in the areas that are typically more shiny than everywhere else with a white. This is something that may be useful if you go to display and you use flat lighting. That way you can see, there's no shading going on, so you can actually see what you're doing here. So we use flat lighting. The head, the whole body has a little bit of specularity. So what you could do to start with is just, we'll get a big brush and we'll knock down our magnitude quite a bit. Maybe something like 30 something. And we're just going to give everything, and I'm pressing down really lightly with my tablet, but I just want everything to have a little bit of specularity. I don't want it to be completely black because that means it's not shiny at all. So I'm just going to really quickly, I'm going to go over the whole body and just make it give it a little bit of noisy specularity. All right, so once I've gone over everything a little bit. Now I can think about like the areas of the face that are going to be really, really shiny, and I can kind of concentrate on them. So like the forehead is usually pretty shiny, so I can give a little bit of lightness to the forehead. Oops, I switched to my selection tool somehow there. So the lips, of course, are going to be a lot shinier than everything else. So I'll make them pretty white. The edges of the eyelids are going to be shiny. The nose, mainly the tip of the nose, is going to be nice and shiny, and the bridge. And then we'll add a little bit of shininess to the cheeks and the chin. And the head in general is usually pretty shiny. Maybe the tops of the ears a little bit. But that's it. And then what we can do at this point is we will go in to make sure, see what this looks like. We can go in and we can create a, let's see if we can just create a channel. No, so we'll just create a new layer, and we just leave it at that because we're just going to pull in our spec channel. So we'll make that a specular channel. So now we have the spec channel down here, and then I can just pull in my specular to that specular channel. And if I go and turn off flat shading, now you'll see that I have like this nice specularity that makes my character the skin look a lot more realistic because he's not shiny in the same places all over. He's shiny in the forehead, he's shiny in the cheeks, around the eyes. So it makes it look a lot nicer. Now I can do things to this in Photoshop to kind of take it to the next level, and I'll get to that. But a specular map is super important to the realism of a skin texture.